Yeah, so pretty much wanted to discuss the body being completely fluid when we're training. So there's a constant back and forth with the body. We're either adapting or we're detraining, right? There's no in between. There's no such thing as a maintenance phase, if you will. Um, Not to take away from things that are called maintenance phases. That's a talk for another day. But I wanted to focus on the fact that the body is very fluid and it's always responding to stimulus, and no stimulus is still a stimulus, and the body will respond to that as well. So this kind of leads into what I've been dealing with a lot as I program for years and years. I'll have a client fall off for a week or two or be sporadic in the gym, and they're still following their program, right? So they'll have a month of training in front of them, and on that month of training, there's 16 total training sessions, but throughout the month, they've only hit, 8, 9, or 10 of those sessions. They've been sporadic, or they had like a week vacation, and then they don't, I don't know if they don't realize perhaps, or they just don't take into account that that's not how it works. The days build on each other. It's not just a bunch of workouts put together and you have, it's not a punch card. It's not 16 workouts that you just punch out whenever you got time for. I think some people can get confused with that for good reason. We just a lot of times pay for a creative workout, but that's obviously not how my workouts work. It's training. So day one is building on day two, and you can only get to day 5 by having completed day 1 through 4 and completing it within a specific time period. So I come across a lot of times clients will skip days and not like hating on it at all. Like, I totally understand there's life outside of training. They'll be on vacation, they'll skip days or whatever, but they'll just continue on with the plan as if they can keep going with it. And this tends to lead to a lot of missed lifts, and it potentially can even lead to some minor injuries, some nags and pains and things like that, because they're trying to do things that their body isn't adjusted to, or they're trying to do things that, yes, they could have been conditioned to, but they have regressed from so many missed training days. And they need to take into consideration that they have to be open with this and vocal that missing training days, everything has to be adjusted. And it's not just to kind of validate myself and keeping me involved in the program or anything. It's truly understanding that the body's fluid. And if you miss these training days, you're not going to be able to complete the next days, at least to the prescription that it was originally designed. So I think it's a very important concept to understand that we are either adapting, right? We're training forward, we're progressing forward, or we're detraining, right? If we skip so many days, the body isn't continuing to develop that conditioning, to develop that strength. And that leads to those problems of the program essentially failing. And so that can get tricky with, hey, your program didn't work. Well, I mean, it's not that it didn't work. It's just, it's very, very tight knit. And as long as the client's interacting with you and letting me know that they've missed some days, we can adjust for that, right? And we can have some auto regulation there in training. But definitely, I just wanted to make it clear to those out there who are training, who are on a very specific program, you can't just pick up where you left off, right? Everything has to be adjusted. Everything has to be regulated. If you missed training, it is a big deal. Not in terms of like, oh, you're a terrible person for missing training. It's just, it's a big deal. It has to be adjusted for. It has to be made up for, because the route in which you were on, you're still heading down that productive, positive path, but we've just got to adjust the ship's sail, if you will, to get back onto a more appropriate course. Make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And the first question that comes to mind as you were talking, and this goes into a much larger context of the difference between training and exercising, or training and working out, or training and being on a less disciplined, less intentional exercise program. So the first question that I would like to pose is, and just to put this into context, let's say that we're talking to an athlete, whether we talk about professional athlete, semi-pro, college athlete, whatever the case may be. That athlete's goals are somewhat inherent. Their goals are to perform at a certain level within their sport, within a certain time period, along the certain parameters that are easily measured within that sport, right? So regardless of what the sport is, and I don't want to dig too deep into that aspect, but regardless of the sport, if we're talking about an athlete, whether college, pro, semi-pro, whatever, that person has some inherent goals that are already built into their program. And at whatever point they get off that training path or off that training regimen, they probably have a staff of personnel that can help them get back on that training regimen. So bringing it down that level, bringing it down to the level of not necessarily the amateur, but we can say the motivated athlete, or the self-motivated athlete, or the weekend warrior, or whomever, whatever way we want to identify this individual. How does that person understand what is the ultimate goal of this training regimen? And therefore, this is the reason why I need to stick to every single workout within the prescribed, weight limits, within the prescribed time limits, within the prescription of this training module. Why do I stick to it? Well, I stick to it because there's an ultimate goal of this training regimen. So for you, as the trainer, as the person who's writing the program, what is the ultimate goal that you look at, and how do you instill that into your client? Like, that's the far goal, or what we might call the distal goal. That's the goal that's down the road. And each workout is a proximal goal toward that ultimate goal that's down the road. Like, how do you paint that picture for your client to let them know, like, this is why it's a big deal that we don't miss workouts. We don't give 50% on a workout. This is the reason why you don't miss a workout. You can shorten it, you can tweak it, you can do what you need to do, because this is real life. But within certain parameters, you don't change that workout. So,
right. So with that, you just got to make sure, and that's the importance of making sure that the client comes up with their goal, and sometimes, believe it or not, I mean, from us, it's an obvious thing that happens, but you really have to pull it out of them. And it's not that they're not interested. You have to just make sure that you get details from them, right? You need to really know what's making them tick, what's really driving their motivation behind their goal. But also you want to get specific with it. So then when times do come, hey, you essentially remind them, like, look, this is your goal, this is what you want to achieve, this is why we have it set up this way. And again, it's not to like punish them if they miss workouts or anything. It's just to advise them and remind them that if they do miss workouts, like, this was meticulously planned out. So if you miss a workout, we have to adjust fire on everything, not to hold you back, but to get you back on track to progress, right? And that can be difficult sometimes, because people see the entire plan in front of them, so they think that as long as they make it to the end of the time frame, they'll be at the end of that goal, and that's obviously not the case, right? There's detours and things like that. So not only do I try to get a really specific goal out of them, I ask a lot of probing questions. I ask them very intimate questions about their specific goal, but I remind them, like, this is a very precise map that we've created, but this map will change with any deviation to it. And again, that's okay. It just has to be understood that you can't just keep going down the same path if you've jumped ship a couple times. So it's really getting them to understand their goal and getting their specific details out of them.
Okay. So something that I touched on, the concept of making up training. So there's a quote, let me find it real quick, that I really like. And it comes from someone who I consider one of my mentors. And although I've never met him, it's the late, great John Wooden. And what he said is, what you do in practice is going to determine your level of success. I used to tell my players, you have to give 100% every day. Whatever you don't give, you can't make up for tomorrow. If you only give 75% today, you can't give 125% tomorrow to make up for it.
Really good.
That's just something that it just seems natural for us to think, oh, well, I can slack off today. I'll go extra hard tomorrow, but obviously, and I don't know if it was John Wooden or if it was someone who was reflecting on what John Wooden said, but they were basically like, if you give 75, 80% today, then that's it. That 20, 25% you didn't give is gone.
Right.
You can't get it back tomorrow. You can't work. There's no such thing as 125% tomorrow. The most you can give on any day is 100. Mm-hmm. So, and you may, the thing that we all need to keep in mind is my 100% today may be very different from my 100% tomorrow, but it's the effort, it's the act of being willing to give that 100%. That's where the gains really happen.
Yeah, I think you made a good point there. Essentially, that quote was perfect in trying to convey my point, but in a very practical, literal manner. You miss a workout, and again, it's not because they're sandbagging or anything. Life happens, and because of that, they want to make it up. So they ask the questions that, hey, let me just do 10 sets tomorrow instead of just 5 sets, or something like that. They just want to cram in everything that they missed into that whenever the next day is that they can train. And the fact of the matter is that we can't do that. Time and a process has to take place, right? There's no beating time. You have to put it in when you can put it in order to allow time to take its place, right? In order to allow healing to happen, in order to allow adaptation to happen. Time is something that we cannot manipulate. And I think a lot of people take advantage of others' misunderstanding of that by trying to sell a bunch of quick recovery modalities and do this for recovery, do that for recovery. We see it a lot in the recovery world, and the fact of the matter is that you cannot manipulate time. It doesn't matter how much rolling you do or how much extra protein you take in. If your body isn't conditioned yet and it's not ready to be at that next level, the only thing that's going to change that is allowing time to take place, right? You cannot speed up time. We can't speed up seconds. We can't speed up minutes. We can't speed up days. They are what they are. And so because of that stressor and that understanding that time cannot be sped up, that's what I view as a stressor. That should really amplify, like, I cannot miss training days. If I do, I need to adjust my future training days to be the most productive that they can be, instead of just trying to grind through the next one, because I can't speed up time. So I got to be the most productive every time I'm in the gym. And again, I can't say it enough. It's okay to miss workouts. It's just driving the imperative point that you can't just keep going on with the rest of your workouts now, because we need to be efficient. We have to, we're fighting time always, and time doesn't change. So we need to adjust the next workouts to be as most efficient as possible, because again, we're dealing with time there in that aspect. So that was a really good point. You always need to give 100%. And if you do miss a day that you can't put it out, then the following day needs to be adjusted so that 100% is appropriate and the most efficient with your time.
So at what point are we officially off program? So let me give
practical question.
Let me give an example. So you write a program for me 4 days a week, and when you wrote that program, let me try to remember. So I can't remember exactly what we talked about, but you broke it down for me as far as like red, yellow, and green days and which days of the week you program certain things and stuff. So the thing is, within the context of that 7-day period, if I don't work out on the exact days that you tell me to work out, am I still adhering to the program as long as I get that prescribed amount of work done within that 7 days? Like, at what point am I so far off program that the program needs to be adjusted?
Yeah, that's a really good practical question. So especially for this is going to be highly dependent on training advancement. So my very deconditioned, very beginner athletes, clients, I'll tell them right off the bat, like, look, this is brand new to you. So fitting 4 days into your routine is going to be some trial and error, right? You may not, it's not smoothed out yet because you haven't practiced this process in terms of the logistics of making this work through your week. So because of that, I'll tell them, like, look, this is a 4-day program. You're really deconditioned and you need to figure out the logistics of training in terms of making it work consistently. So we can take advantage of you being deconditioned by, you have 7 days to get these 4 days in. If you get these 4 days in within the 7-day block of training and everything's progressing and you haven't missed sets and reps and weights, then we're fine. You're on track, right? There's a lot of leeway with the decondition because we've talked about this before. You know, depending on how deconditioned you are, you could go on a brisk walk and have your bench press go up. So you're highly sensitive to training. So get those 4 days in within that week and you're good to go. As far as when you're more advanced in your training, we do have to get more regimented, but because of your advancement, you have logistics down, you have that process smoothed out. So if you're missing a training day, it's probably due to some serious factor, or you made the choice to do something else at that particular time in your life, and that's fine. So then my question becomes then, or my answer to them becomes the same, knowing that it's temporary. Like, for my beginners, I tell them, hey, get the 4 days in within those 7 days for the next couple weeks. I don't care. Just get them in. For that more advanced, if they miss a training day that week, I'll be like, hey, just get those 4 days in during that week. And we're fine still. You know, that week period's not going to be that detrimental. It's when we start seeing it habitually, and that habitual pattern of inconsistency, even if they're getting the 4 days in within the week, I'll start to see pretty quickly missed lifts and things like that. Hey, I missed this weight. Hey, I missed that weight. Hey, I've got a nag in my shoulder right now. You know, I'll start seeing all these developing processes of what looks to be overtraining, but it's not necessarily overtraining. It's just being out of sync, being out of routine. So at that point, that's when I always wait for evidence to present itself. I don't like to screw with people's minds. I don't like to have an inappropriate expectation for them. So I won't tell them, like, hey, if you don't do it this setup, you're going to overtrain, you're going to screw yourself up, because then they're going to have that expectation, right? I'll inform them, you know, hey, still get these 4 training days in, try to stay on schedule, and I won't adjust anything until they have missed lifts going on. And the second they have missed lifts going on, pending any other obvious outside factors, I'll be like, hey, you know, we just need to tighten up ship right now. Let me adjust the next couple weeks to make up for your training right now. Perhaps we need to adjust the days that you're training on. Because of that, I need to adjust how each day's setup looks. But let's tighten up ship. Let me adjust what I can on my end to fit your schedule better right now. We'll make the numbers fit for the next couple weeks again, and let's get back on track. But I won't tell them that they're off program until they start missing appropriate weights. and that's when the conversation will become full effect. Like, hey, you're missing weights. You got a nag in your shoulder. We need to tighten up the ship.
Right. Right. So with so many variables, how do we start to maybe diagnose? How do we start to triage where the problem is? So first of all, and just throwing out a couple questions, food for thought. Can we ever assume that the program is perfect? That's the first question. Number two, can we ever assume that the client is adhering to the regimen as perfectly as we might expect or that we might assume, and so that might leave some room for maybe this person has some other things going on in their life that we don't know about. This is assuming a client that we actually see in the gym on a regular basis, that we actually train with on a regular basis. This is not like a remote client or anything like that, but someone that we see. So we have all that data to try to digest and to analyze and to review and to put into the program. But at what point are we not certain of some of the assumptions that we may be making, because there may be flaws in the data, there may be flaws in the way that we interpret the data?
Yeah, no, there's definitely a hierarchy that I have in mind. I think that's a really good word you use to triage the programming. So essentially, even with remote clients, this isn't an issue at all either. If they're on my program and they're making progress and then they've stalled out, I know the program is working, or at least has worked. So I need to start with the obvious questions first, and that is like, hey, what's going on in life right now? I need to make sure there wasn't anything wild or drastic. Have you missed training sessions? Has there been a bunch of internal stressors, a bunch of internal load that's added up? Making sure that everything's fine there. If it's not fine, then obviously we'll dial back whatever we need to. I'll be like, hey, don't even worry about the weights. Just keep it easy, get life straightened out. That's fine. Or it could be something less dramatic. They're like, hey, my schedule changed at work. This setup just isn't working for me. So then that's when I'll adjust the program in terms of its setup. Whether we're going from 4 days a week to 3 days a week, or maybe we're switching from Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday to like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, something like that. Even subtle changes like that will affect how I program and implement exercises. So I'll start with life factors first. I'll knock out the obvious, and it might stop there if that's all we need to adjust. Right, the program was working before, and it stopped just to life factors changing. I'm just going to keep what was working, but just make it fit better into their schedule, right? And then make sure that they're back on progress, make sure that progress is happening again, and then we're good to go. If life factors aren't an issue, they're like, look, I've been religious on the program 4 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. I've stalled out. I'm not making gains. There's no external life factors, no internal stressors. I was religious to your program. Then 100% without hesitation, it's time to adjust programming. And I think this is where a lot of coaches and a lot of individual clients that kind of train themselves get hung up. They're like, no, this program worked for me before. They're really invested in something that worked before. I don't want to give this up. I need to adjust something else. There's a common theme like, oh, I must have not eaten enough today or something like that. And, we make up these like minimalist excuses for why I've stalled out for the last couple weeks. It's like, no, like the programs run dry. You squeezed all the juice out of it, like move on. Like I have zero issues as a coach. I held no ego to any sort of program. And that's really one of my strong points, is because I don't subscribe to like a program. Like I don't have the Texas method. I don't have 5-3-1. I don't have these programs. I have my my blocks and my categories, and I make those categories extremely fluid, and they're all based off of recent training history. So my program is going to look like whatever it needs to based off of your most recent training history. So if you're a good client and you've done everything to the T, everything's you were compliant with everything and the program stalled, I'm not going to be like, oh, you didn't have enough protein. That's a bogus cop-out statement. Or, hey, you messed something up here. Like, no, these minuscule remarks are cop-out statements. It's the program's run dry. It's time to adjust fire. Let's look at your training history, which was the old program. Hey, it looks like based off of this training history, you need more training volume. So the next block of training, we're going to have more training volume. Or, hey, you've got a ton of volume behind you. Let's switch gears. Let's crank up the intensity. Or maybe altogether, hey, you've been on a strength block for 3 months straight. You've squeezed out the volume. You've squeezed out the intensity. We need to have a pivot block. Let's get you conditioning. Let's get you doing some novelty movements, things like that. Let's wash out your body and get you reset. Like I have zero issues with changing a program like that, pending that the obvious is adjusted for. And I'll always start with the obvious questions because I don't want to adjust a program without knowing if I adjust the program first thing, but then I didn't ask them about, hey, their work schedule changed, well, then the program's still not going to work. So I need to make sure, one, that I don't need to adjust its layout. And if I don't need to adjust its layout, then I'm going to change the formatting of the program.
Right.
That was a really good question to bring up.
Well, and the thing, of course, it was a loaded question asking about what is the perfect program, and that's the simple answer there is the perfect program is the one that gets us closer to the ultimate goal. Mm-hmm. And at whatever point we need to adjust that program, well, we can't assume that the program wasn't perfect. It's just a matter of, are we moving toward the goal or are we not moving toward the goal? And for me, and this definitely was apparent, in my training in psychology, that when we do an experiment, we try to minimize the variables so that we can find out what is the one variable that affects the outcome that we're looking at. So we try to minimize it. We try to control for every other factor so that we can isolate just that one variable that is causing a certain effect that we have observed. So that sets us up, like we think about that in terms of training and in terms of so many other areas of life, that we want to assume that there is one root cause for this specific effect that we are able to observe. So we try to pare it down to what is that one root cause. And if we fix that one thing, then we fix everything. Well, obviously life is complex. Like you said, the body is fluid. Life is holistic. Everything touches on everything else. It is extremely difficult to pare down anything to a singular cause. You
cannot have a reductionist mindset when it comes to anything with the human. Right. You can't have it.
Right.
There's too many variables.
It just doesn't work. So that is a good segue into what you mentioned it earlier, talking about these recovery programs and specifically those, and I think we can talk about these together, recovery programs and quote unquote injury prevention programs, that to me, those definitely play in this arena that we're talking about. They try to diagnose some effect that is observable. They try to pare it down to a singular cause, and let's treat that one cause with the assumption that it'll swing back around and fix the observable behavior that we're trying to fix.
Right.
So several flaws in there, several fallacies. Just what is your thought in general on recovery programs and injury prevention?
Yeah, so I'll keep these quick just so they're concise. When it comes to recovery, we need to focus on the fact that we can't change time, right? There isn't anything that's going to speed up recovery. The only thing that's going to speed up recovery is your basics. And if And if you're doing these at the best that you can, then nothing's going to improve recovery at this point. So what I mean is, what will speed up recovery is getting better sleep, right? So obviously, if you're not getting good enough sleep, if you're not getting proper nutrition, if you're not getting these basics down, well, then yes, we can speed up recovery because we're just getting you to be a better responsible human in terms of taking care of yourself. So I wouldn't call that speeding up recovery. I would call that getting your fundamentals down, improving your sleep, improving your nutrition. That by nature will help facilitate recovery. But even then, it's going to be highly dependent on time, not necessarily any sort of modalities that promote recovery. We don't have to go into details there. But if they're not aiding in the body's biological functions of healing, they're not promoting recovery. They may feel good, they may be some temporary relief, but that's not actual recovery, right? I think we get a lot of times distracted by these temporary relief modalities, and that's not biologically, that's not structurally creating a healing process. It's not causing recovery. With that, sleep, nutrition, obviously, those are biological processes. When they're high quality, that will improve recovery, right? If we neglect protein intake, we can't expect to have a lot of lean tissue developed. Whereas if we have a high quality amount and high amounts of protein, we'll have a good response to some muscle protein synthesis. But another factor that people forget is training in and of itself is recovery, right? The more you train, the more your body becomes recoverable. And that's by nature of the fact that over time, we have to do more and more work, right? We always talk about that. We have to apply more stress to the body in order to get a new response. But what we forget to realize is because the reason why we have to apply more stress is because the body has efficiently recovered from all this stuff, right? So a brand new beginner who does 3 sets of 5 on a lift, that's all they can recover from, right? Whereas somebody who's 10 years into resistance training, who's doing 5, 6 sets of 6, if I did that on a beginner, they'd be paralyzed for the next week. They wouldn't be able to recover from that. Whereas that stronger athlete has to do more to get less, right? But his recovery abilities of that more are exponential. So training in and of itself actually aids in recovery, pending that we're training right and allowing the body to adapt to more and more work, right? The process of literally doing more work by nature has us improve our recovery. As far as injury prevention, you'll hear this a lot in the warm-up protocols and things like that. And I think that's a distracting term or a loaded term. I mean, obviously a warm-up is going to prevent acute injuries, and a proper warm-up should be done. But nothing is going to prevent an injury if fatigue isn't managed, right? If you have an inappropriate amount of fatigue accumulated, you can do all the fancy warm-up drills in the world. It's not going to dissipate fatigue. The only thing that's going to dissipate fatigue is time, recovery. So if you're extremely fatigued and you have a 45-minute injury prevention warm-up and you go out there and you get hurt, it has nothing to do with anything else besides your level of fatigue was too high. There's no other cop-out answer to deal with. So I think we got to be careful with the words of injury prevention when it comes to warm-ups, and understanding that we need to make sure that we address the underlying cause, which is a lot of the times fatigue. So paying attention to fatigue rather than this arbitrary statement of injury prevention and warm-ups, and then understanding that recovery, we can't change time. Time is a constant variable. Nutrition, sleep, and more training are the things that will 100% improve recovery, and that's what we have the evidence to support with. And I think when we go outside of this area, by making a lot of arbitrary claims, a lot of claims that are false, It's not about like, hey, that's wrong, I'm right. It's about the fact that that's distracting you from the fundamentals, right? If we didn't have all of these other modalities out there promoting recovery, and we only had the client, if the client only had to focus on three things, that was all they could think about was sleep, nutrition, and more training, right? If we restricted their mindset to those three things, well, guess what? They would hyper focus on those things, right? They would get better sleep. They would get better nutrition. They would do more training because that's the only thing they can do. All of their focus has been put in the right direction rather than distracted by all these shiny, glittery modalities out there. So I think that's critical to keep a good filter for the client.
Right, right. So as we start to bring this to a close, just to reiterate on a couple things that we talked about, that the body is fluid, always responding to stimulus. That on that note, that we are either adapting to the stimulus or we are in a detraining state, that there really is no, for the sake of this discussion, there is no real maintenance. You're either moving forward or you're moving backward. Those are the only two options. So we also talked about recovery and quote unquote injury prevention as buzzwords that really, and this goes back to something that we continually talk about, that as professionals in this arena, there are tons of variables. It is a very complex subject by nature, but once it gets filtered down to the client level, it's our job to make it more simple. So boiling this down to its essence, we would coach the client on nutrition, quality of sleep, quality of training. Those, if we can get our client to just focus on those variables, then we can really manage their program much more effectively than, as you said, looking at the shiny objects, looking at the minor thing that someone wants to write a book on, because they can't sell you anything that talks about the basics anymore. So now it's
that's like, a really good way to put it. Yeah.
Now it's like, okay, let's talk about this one minute detail and get everyone to focus on that. And there are different paradigms that people follow. I understand that. My thought is, let's go with what is the least complex modality that we can. So once we are absolutely certain that nutrition, sleep, and training are perfect, then we can start focusing on the tiny, minute details.
Sure. Yeah.
9 times out of 10, or, I like to say I'm happy with 80%. So 8 times out of 10, we can boil it down to some aspect of nutrition, sleep, or training.
100%.
Right.
That's a really, really good way to sum it up. Definitely.
Right. So you have any closing thoughts before we wrap on this one?
I think that was good. I think we're all good, man. Appreciate the talk.
All right. Definitely.